Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you so much for being here tonight. 500 people have been killed in an attack on a Gaza hospital. The hospital is an Episcopalian run hospital, a Christian run hospital in Gaza, and 500 people are now dead. The big question is who did it? Both sides are blaming each other. The IDF is saying that this was a Hamas rocket that went rogue and ended up leveling a building, killing 500 people. Hamas is saying this was the Israelis, that they fired on a hospital where women and children were sheltering, where people were not only being treated like people are treated in a hospital for wounds and illnesses, but that people were actually seeking shelter there after being told to evacuate by the Israelis. They evacuated to a place where they thought would be safe, which is a hospital, and it turns out it was not safe for them at all. And now many people are dead. This is the deadliest attack, I think, that has ever happened at one time in Gaza, minus some of the larger scale wars in the past. But in recent times, this is certainly the deadliest day in Gaza's history. So this is really tragic. We're going to go over the evidence and what both sides are saying and the evidence that they're presenting to showcase that, to kind of make a guess, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a guess for a lot of people on who actually committed this heinous crime. Now, of course, it's probably an accident, I would say. Certainly, if Hamas did it, it was an well, we'll go into it. Maybe it wasn't an accident, and there's definitely possibilities why either side would not, if either side were involved or responsible for this, that it wouldn't be an accident. There's certainly reasons to think it is an accident, right? A really tragic, terrible accident of war that happens. But we're going to go through everything and break it down. And then at the end of it, hopefully you can make up your own mind on what you think happened, who the likely culprit is. Let's start off with the news, the headlines. We'll just kind of go in sequential order of what happened before we get to the evidence. So first of all, here's ABC News showcasing that at least 500 have been killed. I actually want to show you. So this is the Gaza hospital, the Gaza Health Ministry, which many have pointed out that's a Hamas-run health ministry because it's their government health ministry. So if they say 500 people are dead, in the beginning, people were skeptical of this, saying, well, it's Hamas. You can't really believe them. They're probably crying wolf. And so take it for a grain of salt. Well, now the people on the ground who are not affiliated with Hamas, various different groups, human rights organizations and medical organizations are saying that this is real, that this really did happen, and it's terrible, and we have footage of it. Let's actually show the strike. You can listen to the strike. You can see the strike. So there was questions on whether or not this was like one of the thoughts that was kind of floating around in the beginning was that Hamas is hiding weapons in hospitals, and one of them just exploded, that this wasn't a rocket attack. But listen for yourself. This was clearly very much, when you watch this video and hear this video, obviously a missile hit this building. Watch this.
Ya Allah! Ya Allah! Ya Allah!
So you could hear the strike. Clearly, it just whizzed right through the air and struck that building. So this was not some explosive underground or, ammunitions that caught on fire and exploded or anything like that, like what they claim happened at the Beirut port in Lebanon, if you remember a few years back. But instead, this was clearly a rocket strike. Okay, so the question is, who struck it? The world began condemning this. Immediately, the reports came out, and immediately all of the mainstream news started pointing the finger at Israel, saying Israel struck this hospital. And this was the news that every mainstream organization was reporting. Now, the Israelis and those who are very supportive of Israel have said, how dare these outlets do this without any evidence, that they were premature. And perhaps that's true. Perhaps people were premature in deciding on who it actually was that struck this hospital. But again, we're going to go through all of the evidence and see for ourselves who we think is the most likely culprit of committing this terrible, terrible atrocity with 500 people dead. The IDF came out originally and said, so when the world was saying Israel struck a hospital in Gaza, killing 500 civilians, the IDF said, we're investigating this. They said, we don't target hospitals, but we're still investigating this. I do want to point out, however, that they have asked many hospitals to evacuate in recent days. So if you're not planning on targeting a hospital, why would you have the hospital evacuate? They asked 20 hospitals in the northern region of Gaza to evacuate. Many of those hospitals came out and said, we cannot move these critically ill patients. If you move a critically ill patient, where are we going to take them? For one, they'll die. Where are we going to go? There was a lot of pleading from human rights organizations, from the hospital organization, saying we cannot evacuate these hospitals. This isn't a reasonable request. It's impossible. But Israel's saying we don't target hospitals. So then the question is, why would you ask them to evacuate if you're not planning on targeting hospitals? So that's question one we should be asking. President Abbas immediately, so after this happens, the Palestinian President Abbas, who is set to meet with Joe Biden. Joe Biden is on Air Force One right now, heading to Israel. He left earlier today. His plan was to go over there and meet with Netanyahu and also meet with some Arab leaders. That included the Palestinian president, the president of Egypt, Jordan, and I believe the United Arab Emirates. They have all canceled this meeting now. There was meant to be a summit in Jordan, and the Jordanian government said, it ain't happening. We are not meeting with you. They're pointing the blame at the United States, and there's reason for that. We're going to get to that. But as of now, tensions are extremely high. We are seeing mass protests all around the world at Israeli embassies. Israelis have been asked to evacuate Turkey. They've been told, get out, come home. It is no longer safe for you to be there, not because they think Turkey's going to go to war with Israel or anything like that, but they believe that the tensions amongst the civil population are so high that now Israelis are at risk of violence and retaliation, which is terrible, and people should not be taking out their aggression. Remember, our governments put us in these positions. These are our government leaders. This is American government, Israeli government, Hamas leadership, whoever. But the average person we don't have a say. We try, we do our best to get our governments to listen to us, but we don't really have any control over our governments and what they do. So it is not right to target the civilians of any citizenship simply because they're civilians of that citizenship and their country's leadership is choosing to do heinous things. Many of us do not support what our country does, but we don't have a choice because they're bought off by the military-industrial complex. They've got their own ideas of what they want to do and what is the best way, the best way to spend U.S. taxpayer dollars. It is what it is. We don't have a lot of control over it, but nonetheless, there is a ton of and I'm not sure if the Israeli citizens, certainly they've been asked to leave Turkey, and possibly Turkey's the only one I know of for sure, but perhaps they're being asked to leave other countries as well. Certainly, though, the ambassadors are under a lot of pressure around the world. A lot of the Arab citizenry wants the ambassadors of Israel, the Israeli ambassadors to their nations, to be expelled. This is something that Colombia already did. And now a lot of these Arab nations are saying it's time we don't want diplomatic relations with Israel. They cause problems. They're not fighting fair. They commit human rights abuses, and we want them gone. Again, we're assessing the evidence. That is under the assumption that the Israelis were the ones who hit this hospital, that it was their missile that leveled the hospital. Again, they are saying that it was Hamas, that Hamas had a rogue rocket, and that the rocket misfired and hit the hospital and killed 500 people instead. And that is what after they said that they had investigated, they were looking into it, they then quickly came out and said it wasn't us, it was a failed Islamic Jihad rocket that caused the devastation at the Gaza hospital. So that is what they're running with. And they're saying, this wasn't us, we don't target hospitals. This was one of their rockets. They were firing rockets at us, and one of them went rogue, and it ended up hitting the hospital. Once they came out with that, I do want to show you that. Here's a tweet. This tweet I saw probably 1,000 times, the same tweet. And it wasn't a retweet of the same tweet. It was actually people taking the language and putting it on their own tweets and tweeting it out almost like a bot farm. So this I thought was whenever I see something like that, it's a bit alarming. Usually I see maybe a lot of sentiment towards one thing, but people are saying they're using their own words. But in this case, it was the same words over and over, tweet after tweet after tweet from various different accounts saying, first clear footage from the Al Ali tragedy in Gaza. But what do you notice? This is a surface explosion. Almost no soil is thrown up, so it's not an air bomb. Looks like a failed Hamas rocket that landed there. What a tragedy has Hamas brought to the people of Gaza? So this tweet went around over and over and over saying that it's not an air bomb. We did certainly hear that it was absolutely a rocket that struck this building. There's no question about that when you actually hear it. Clearly, a rocket or a missile hit that building. So the Israelis then came out on their Twitter account. It's at Israel, or their X account, I guess is what we're calling it now. This was their first attempt at saying it wasn't us, it was Hamas. They had to delete this tweet because actually a reporter, I believe, with who was the report? Was it Wall Street Journal or New York Times? Oh, I should cite the journalists correctly. But one of the mainstream journalists actually ended up fact checking this as a visual investigator for one of the main outlets, investigated this and said, oh, the timestamp on your video is not accurate. The timestamp on your video is well after the actual attack at the hospital. So this video is not accurate. So Israel actually deleted the video. They kept the tweet, they deleted the video. The tweet says, breaking from the IDF spokesperson, from the analysis of the operational systems of the IDF, an enemy rocket barrage was carried out towards Israel, which passed through the vicinity of the hospital when it was hit. According to intelligence information from several sources we have, the Islamic Jihad terrorist organization is responsible for the failed shooting that hit the hospital. And then they had this video that was airing, and they were showing the rockets that were flying and showing that this was and then the hospital was hit, and so it was one of the rogue rockets. But again, a reporter from one of the mainstream outlets actually fact-checked this and said, your timestamp is off. This video was not from the same time of the hospital explosion. So Israel, in their first attempt to counter the narrative that they were behind this attack, they ended up having to delete that tweet, and then they edited their tweet, and that's what's there now. Then they released a second attempt at swaying public opinion into believing that this was Hamas and not them. And they showed this hospital. They said the Palestinians are falsely claiming Israel targeted a hospital. If you can bring hospital in the Gaza Strip. The thing is, they're the ones who have they're the ones who have a habit of launching missiles at hospitals packed with innocent civilians. This is from a rocket launch on a maternity ward in an Israeli hospital. So they're saying they hit hospitals, not us. And here's the footage that they showed of their maternity ward having been hit by a rocket. Now, I want you to pay attention to this footage, though, because this is part of the evidence on who potentially did it. This is what it looks like when a Hamas homemade rocket hits Israel. This is definitely damaging, and this could kill somebody and maybe a couple of people for sure. If you're standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, this will kill you. This is terrifying. Nobody would want their hospital, their building, their anywhere hit like this, right? But this isn't a leveled building that killed 500 people. This is what a Hamas rocket attack looks like. And this is consistent with the rocket attacks that do land in Israel. There aren't very many. Their Iron Dome protects them pretty well. But the ones that land, this is consistent with the damage of the ones that land. They kill maybe one or two people. They take out cars. They take out walls. They don't ever level a building. They've never leveled a building. I don't believe ever once they've ever been able to level a building. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so they give us this footage and they're like, see, they're the ones who hit hospitals. But we know that Israel in their strikes in Gaza, they hit schools, they hit hospitals, they hit ambulances. And so this kind of showing, look what Hamas does. They hit hospitals, not us. We know the Israelis hit hospitals. They admit it. They say, well, but they're hiding weapons in these schools. They're using human shields. If Hamas didn't hide weapons in hospitals and schools, we wouldn't have to hit hospitals and schools. So they've already admitted to targeting civilian infrastructure. They just claim that the civilian infrastructure is housing weapons for Hamas. So showing us like, well, we're not the ones who do it, they do it. Well, we know they do it too. So they both do it clearly, right? But the question is, who leveled a hospital and killed 500 people, leveled an entire building? So this was their third attempt. So that was their second attempt at saying it wasn't us. Then they released a third attempt saying, see, really, it wasn't us. So after they originally deleted the first security footage that ended up not being the correct time, Al Jazeera had a broadcast that was going live at that time that actually had the bombing of the hospital in the background. So they're saying, look at this. This documents the moment, and you're going to see a Hamas rocket flying in the air, and then you're going to see the hospital bombing, and that is showing you that this was Hamas's rogue rocket. So they said an Al Jazeera broadcast documented the moment that the Islamic Jihad launched a rocket which misfired and hit a hospital in Gaza, killing hundreds. Let's look at the video of this. So you can see that rocket flying right there. So there's a rocket flying into the air. That rocket was intercepted, it looked like. And then you see down there, the hospital has been bombed. So they're saying, see that Hamas was firing rockets, and one of their rockets went rogue and ended up hitting this hospital. So that's the one of their most latest attempts at saying it wasn't us, it was Hamas. Okay. Let's look at some other evidence. Let's first look at Cy Hirsch, excellent journalist. He actually released a piece just a few days ago saying that Israel was planning on using a JDAM bomb that they were given from the United States, that they were sold. The U.S. started selling them some JDAM bombs recently in order to help them, and that they were going to be attacked by these very sophisticated targeted weapons as early as Sunday or Monday. Now, of course, it's Tuesday, so Cy Hirsch wasn't quite off on that one. Let me just go ahead and read from this for you. So saying this isn't the actual piece from Cy, but you can certainly get that on his Substack. And I'm a subscriber to his Substack, so I read his pieces. He does excellent work. But this one says, according to Hirsch, the attack is scheduled between Sunday and Monday, saying that the Israeli occupation is planning an aggression on Gaza using a new version of Joint Direct Attack Munition, which is JDAM bombs, capable of killing all people within 1/2 mile from the dropping site. U.S. investigative journalist Seymour Hersh said on Sunday, citing sources. According to Hersh, it's happening Sunday or Monday, although it happened Tuesday, so he's pretty close. Says the current, quote from Cy's piece, the current Israeli war planners are convinced, the insider told me, that the upgraded version of JDAMs with larger warheads would penetrate deep enough underground before detonating 30 to 50 meters, with the blast and resulting sound wave killing all within 1/2 mile. The insider also said the current planning calls for the JDAM's attack, if authorized, to come as early as Sunday or Monday, depending on how the forced expulsion of Gazans from Gaza City and the South proceeds, with a ground invasion to follow immediately, Hirsch said in his Substack column. So he was actually saying in his Substack, let me actually pull up the piece, and I'm gonna read from it just a little bit more to you. I know we don't have the screenshot of it, but this is from his Substack, which is seymourhersh.substack.com. And he says that over the past week, let's see. So he says, Israeli, let me just kind of skim through this just real briefly for you, because there were some things on here that were really interesting that he said. Was that the point? It says by the end of the week, Israeli jets were dropping leaflets telling citizens of Gaza City and its surrounding areas in the north that those who wish to survive had better start going south, walking if necessary, 25 miles or more to the Rafah border crossing leading to Egypt. As of this writing, it was not clear whether financially stricken Egypt would allow 1 million immigrants, many of them committed to the Hamas cause, to cross. In the short term, I've been told by an Israeli insider that Israel has been trying to convince Qatar, which at the urging of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was a longtime financial supporter of Hamas, to join with Egypt in funding a tent city for the millions or more refugees awaiting across the border. It's not a done deal, the Israeli insider told me. Israeli officials have warned Egypt and Qatar that without a landing site, the refugees will have to go back to Gaza. One possible site, the insider said, is a long abandoned chunk of land in northern part of the Sinai Peninsula near the border crossing from Gaza. So essentially taking all of these Palestinians in Gaza and moving them into Egypt in this like unoccupied strip of land. That was the site of an Israeli settlement that was seized by Israel after its victory in the Six-Day War of 1967. The settlement was evacuated and bulldozed by Israel before Sinai was returned to Egypt in 1982. The Israeli hope is that Qatar and Egypt will take the refugee crisis off its hands. So they're trying to bomb in order to get the civilians to move. And they dropped a bunch of leaflets saying, get the heck out of here. Walk if you have to, 25 miles. And remember, the hospitals were saying, we cannot. We have babies in incubators. We have, talk about throwing babies out of incubators, right? I mean, that's how we ended up getting into some wars in the past. So literally, though, they were saying we've got babies in incubators. We've got elderly people hooked up to machines. We've got people that are critically wounded. We cannot move these patients without there being some serious, they just won't survive. Israel didn't seem to care. But according to the Cy Hirsch, they were getting these, it says, with the starved out civilian population forced to leave, the Israeli operational plan calls for the Air Force to destroy the remaining structures in Gaza City and elsewhere in the north. Gaza City will be no more. Israel will then begin dropping American-made 5,000-pound bombs known as bunker busters, or JDAMs, in the flattened areas where Hamas fighters are known to live and manufacture their missiles and other weapons underground. An improved version of the weapon known as GBU-43/B, depicted by the media as the mother of all bombs, was dropped on suspected ISIS commander center in Afghanistan by the U.S. in April of 2017. So so he's saying the current Israeli war planners are convinced, the insider told me, that the upgraded version of JDAMs with larger warheads would penetrate deep enough underground before detonating, 30 to 50 meters, with the blast and resulting sound wave killing all within a half a mile. So the insider said it was his understanding that Hamas leadership wanted some civilians to stay put because of their need for human shields. The new Israeli plan of forced exit means at least the people would not be killed, not be all killed. The concept, he added pointedly, dated back to the early years of America's Vietnam War, when President JFK's administration authorized the Strategic Hamlet Plan that called for the forced relocation of Vietnamese civilians in contested areas to hastily build housing in areas thought to be controlled by the South Vietnamese. Their deserted lands would then be declared to be free fire zones where all who stayed could be targeted by American troops. So, look, whether Hamas told the civilians to stay and to be human shields, that doesn't justify then blowing up the human shields. So if you're living in an apartment building and there's a serial killer and the FBI's on the hunt for the serial killer and they're hunkering down in grandma's unit, which happens to be 2 doors down from yours, does that mean the FBI has the right to bomb your building, including you, on the hunt for the serial killer? Should you have to die because, well, the serial killer should have thought about that before they hunkered down in your house? Maybe they should have had more respect for your life because they knew we were going to bomb it, and so it's their fault. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. We would blame the FBI, and we would say, how dare you bomb a building filled with 100 civilians, all in an effort to get one serial killer. We don't agree that that trade-off is worth it. But Israel is trying to claim, well, they're using them for human shields, so what are we going to do, right? What are we going to do? So you've got some evidence there. Cy Hirsch called it. He has an Israeli insider, and the Israeli insider is saying they're going to be using these JDAM bombs, and those bombs are going to be used as early as Sunday or Monday. Here we are. And they potentially use these bombs, and we're going to show you exactly why. So also, where did they get these bombs? Well, the United States. And this is one of the problems that a lot of people are having right now, is that Many of these weapons got into the hands of the Israelis because we rushed them these weapons. Here was from the FDD. The latest developments: the United States is surging the transfer of weapons to Israel in the wake of the horrific October 7th terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas. A senior Pentagon official stated on October 9th that the support includes air defense and munitions, and that the Pentagon is contacting U.S. industry to gain expedited shipment of pending Israeli orders for military equipment. Bloomberg reported on October 10th that the pending order of 1,000 small diameter bombs was already picked up by an Israeli transport aircraft, and that an additional sale of joint direct attack munitions, that's the JDM conversion kits, which convert unguided bombs into precision munitions, is being accelerated. So we gave them these bombs. Now the question is, was one of these bombs what attacked the hospital? Now, these are 5,000-pound bombs that can level anywhere from a half a mile radius. So, depending on, I think, depending on from how far away it hits. And you've got a hospital that has been leveled with 500 people dead, and we don't have ever any evidence in the past that Hamas has ever been able to manufacture a weapon powerful enough to do any damage to that extent. So I want to show you let's show you the video of the hospital. Well, here's the video of them. This is a video put out October 12th. The Israeli Defense Forces put this video out of them receiving these bombs, of them showcasing these weapons, these missiles that they received. Then I want to show you Hamas's weapons. We also have a video of Hamas showing off their weaponry, which is dinky in comparison. When you look at the size of those bombs compared to those missiles compared to the size of the wimpy little Hamas rockets. You look at these rockets that Hamas has. I mean, look at these skinny things. Do you think that could level a building? Could those level a building and destroy 500 people in the process? I mean, these are not ginormous. Look at this. These are not huge rockets. So Israel regularly levels buildings in Gaza. Hamas has never been able to level a building, not a big building in Israel. Walls, cars. We're actually going to show you the difference in what a strike looks like in Gaza versus the rocket attacks in Israel. Let's show you the video of the hospital being bombed again, just so that you have the reference point again. Listen to the sound. Okay, so you hear that sound. Now I want to show you this video. This is an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. This was, what, a few days ago, was this? Or maybe it doesn't actually matter when this one was. Just want to show you what an Israeli airstrike can do in Gaza, what it does to the buildings, what it sounds like. Watch this.
الله أكبر.
Okay, the destruction from that is definitely enough to kill anybody who's in a building if one of those buildings is coming down when it gets struck. There's no doubt about that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at, this is from a news report. This was from a few years ago, Hamas rocket attacks in Israel. This is what this is like.
¿Qué va a pasar?
Muy nerviosa
¿Por qué?
por todo lo que está pasando, porque no es una guerra. Esto es una masacre.
Okay, so I guess actually both of those videos were recent but you see the devastation and the destruction of what the Israeli rocket strike in Gaza looks like. You saw leveled buildings. You saw, I mean, everything was destroyed in the entire block. And then you look at the rocket strike of what happens in Gaza. You see a car that looks burnt up. You see a wall that has been blown through by the rocket. The sound to me is similar, you know, a rocket, but this is the destruction of what a Hamas rocket does in Israel. It's not leveling a city block. You see a little destruction of a wall. You see the burnt up car, right? But when you look at the destruction of what happened in Gaza, it is, I mean, the city's leveled. That whole area is leveled. People are in rubble. So there's a big difference between what an Israeli rocket can do and what a Hamas rocket can do. I would say an Israeli missile and a Hamas rocket. And the destruction is very different. And one of them looks like it could kill 500 people, and the other one looks like it could kill 5 people. No death is okay. All of it is horrible. But we're trying to get to the bottom of who did this, who's likely to have done this particular strike that leveled a hospital, killing 500 people. So I want to show you this other video attempt. This was also Israel saying, hey, this is, you know, we did not do this. Let's show you the video evidence. It wasn't us. This was Hamas. This was a video you could see of Hamas absolutely firing off rockets, lots and lots of rockets being fired off. Then you do see the hospital in the distance blow up. So here you can see the rockets. So there's Hamas firing off tons of rockets, most of them blowing up, being intercepted. Or now the Israelis claim one of these went rogue and hit the hospital and leveled it, which again, for one, it's further away from where the rockets are firing off. The idea that a rocket, one of those rockets that's further away, would actually stray to the point where it would hit that hospital. Okay, maybe that's possible for sure. But to level the hospital, these rockets, again, are just not that powerful. They just don't have those types of weapons. And if they did, this would be a very different war. I mean, that's just the bottom line. If they had weapons like that could level a building, this would be a different war. And it's not. It is, Israel's got all the big weapons. Hamas has homemade rockets. They're not that powerful. They're easily intercepted. This would be a very different war if they had weapons of that mass of destruction. So now let me just show you the last little thing we've got here is the Department of, this is the Pentagon spokesperson from the United States talking about Israel, saying, well, Hamas hides ammunition in hospitals. So it's almost like they're in a side way confirming that this was Israel, that, well, you know, Hamas is hiding weapons in hospitals. So what are we supposed to do? Watch this.
Governments like us, our democracies, is what separates ourselves from Hamas. We certainly expect Israel, as with any ally or partner, to uphold the law of war. It should be very clear that Hamas is the one putting Palestinians or those in Gaza at great risk. I mean, they are putting their command and control units inside hospitals, inside areas where there are innocent civilians. So the fact that they've set up command centers at these hospitals just shows the brutality that they're willing to engage on, that they're willing to use civilians as a way to mask their operations, but also to see them as casualties. That's not how we democracies are going to, or how the secretary in his conversations with Minister Gallant, we have always emphasized that the law of war be upheld.
Well, okay. The law of war being that you don't go and attack a hospital. I don't care if there's missiles hiding in that hospital. You don't kill 500 civilians just to get to those missiles or to those rockets, I should say, or to get to the somebody in Hamas. There is really no justification for that. You are a sophisticated military. You have intelligence that is supposed to be the best in the world. You have the backing of the mightiest military on the planet. Find another way. Find another way. Don't kill all those civilians. We ask this of our own government. We get really pissed off when our own government drones civilians. 10 civilians get killed in Afghanistan, and we're pissed off about that. We say, do better, do better. Why can't the Israelis do better? They say, well, because they're using all of these Palestinians as human shields. Okay, then. So you don't value their life. You think that they're just well, they're in the way, so I guess we just have to kill them too. I mean, that's just the rules of war. That is not the rules of war. We do not accept that. That is not a civilized society. And that is why the world is turning against Israel on this. They're looking at them and they're saying, this is monstrous. You are not able to do this. Find another way. For another thing to keep in mind is that Hamas is not allowed a military. The Palestinian people are not allowed a military. They're not actually a state of people. They're not actually a country. They're stateless and they're under occupation by the Israelis. So they're not allowed military bases. This whole notion that Hamas is hiding all these weapons in the civilian population and so it's their fault. Okay, so let's just play for a minute here. Hamas starts a military base someplace. How long do you think the Israelis would allow a military base to exist for Hamas? That thing would get blown up within 5 minutes. They're not allowed a military. They're not really allowed to rise up. So this is a guerrilla warfare force, essentially. These are civilians. Hamas, ultimately, they are civilians. They're civilians who rose up, created a militia group, are a political party, and they're trying to fight back against the Israelis. It is a very Hamas is a mistake to have been funded by Netanyahu, to have been propagated, to have been pushed on the Palestinian people. It's not a good organization. It definitely should not be there. There's no doubt about that. But we have to be realistic about what it is. This is not an actual trained military force that is able to do military exercises and have a military base and truly have national sovereignty the way that any other nation would have. They're not allowed a military. So these are like guerrilla warfare militia fighters that are using whatever building they can use to to plot and plan and house their weapons. And that is just the reality of it on the ground. We know this. This is factual based. We understand this. So the question is, how do you learn to fight that? Certainly not bombing civilians. It's very difficult to fight guerrilla warfare. This is why the United States lost in Vietnam. It's very difficult to go in and fight these forces who have figured out how to fight you in a very different tactical way when they are not a mighty military. This guerrilla warfare happens when there's disproportionate might between the two different fighting forces. This is like Vietnam against the French and Vietnam against the United States. And what we're seeing with the Palestinians against the Israelis. These are not equal fighting forces. And so guerrilla warfare is the way these battles are won by the underdog. There's still rules to that war. Of course, it doesn't seem like anybody in war follows rules. Civilians are always caught in the middle. Civilians are always raped, maimed, burnt, killed. This is why war is wrong. We should do everything that we can to prevent war, to call for peace, to get two sides to the table, to negotiate, to talk it out, because there's always going to be civilian casualties, no matter how much you try to minimize civilian casualties. Russia, in their invasion in Ukraine, has actually been much more measured in their attempts at reducing civilian casualties, but they're still not totally successful. Civilians, children, women, elderly are still being killed in that war. That is the fact of war. That is why war is so heinous. That is why so many of us want to see it stop. That's why so many of us say, get to the table and negotiate this out, come to an actual peace agreement. So Israel needs to find a better way on how to fight the guerrilla warfare that Hamas has enacted upon them. They can do it. I'm confident that these sophisticated militaries with sophisticated intelligence can figure this out. I know it's a difficult proposition. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm sure they could try to figure it out. But looking at the evidence, it is really clear that, I mean, the bottom line is Hamas just doesn't have a weapon this powerful. I mean, that's just that's really the only evidence we need. The bottom line is they don't have a weapon powerful enough. The only way this could have happened with Hamas doing it is the rocket would have hit the building and the building had stores of ammunition, and then the ammunition blew up. So there would have to be a secondary explosion, and that's not what anyone saw. Of course, we're not there on the ground yet. There's still information coming out. We could still see more evidence. It could end up that it was Hamas in the end. We're waiting to see all of that evidence. We can't come to a definitive conclusion by any means, but we can use some common sense and some basic knowledge of what we've known for years, and that is that Israel has the ability to level buildings and Hamas doesn't. So if a building is leveled and 500 people are dead, it looks like it's probably the person who had the weapon, not the one who didn't. So this is just extremely tragic. We will continue following this. Would love to hear from you on what you think happened, any more evidence that you have on who you think did it, whether or not if it was done purposefully. Certainly, look, Israel gave warnings to hospitals saying evacuate. Cy Hirsch has a piece out saying that they were planning on using these weapons to level Gaza and to push the civilians towards Egypt. It looks like this would have been then purposefully targeting Gazans. However, if Israel was not purposefully targeting Gazans and this was a mistake, they might have been trying to intercept those rockets or fire at wherever those rockets that we saw in that video was coming from. You know, those rockets were coming fast and furious, and of course their Iron Dome was protecting them. But they still maybe wanted to fire off a missile and target that region, and it didn't hit correctly. It went in a different direction, and it ended up hitting a hospital. It could have very well been an accident. If Hamas was actually behind it, it could have been an accident, a stray missile, I suppose, that leveled a building. Or it could have been purposeful if Hamas was behind it in order to gain sympathy of the world, in order to get the world to turn and to get the Arab nations to no longer recognize Israel and to no longer be opening up diplomatic relations with Israel. There's a lot of reasons why anybody would want to do this on both sides. And there's a lot of reasons to think it could have been an accident on either side's war. There's a lot of accidents. But again, this is at the fundamental root of it. It doesn't really, whoever did it, it matters. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter. It matters because it matters on should the U.S. continue supporting this war by giving Israelis weapons? Should the Israelis go to the negotiating table and actually come up with a political, diplomatic solution with their problem with the Palestinian question? It matters, but at the same time, it doesn't matter to the 500 people who are dead. And this is why we need to absolutely be calling for peace and calling for a ceasefire. All right, guys. 60% of U.S. pork production comes from one company owned by the Chinese, and their hogs are given something called ractopamine, which is banned in 160 countries, including China. Yet, guess what? You find it in your grocery aisle every day. Well, there's a better way, and I'd like to tell you about Moink. That is moo plus oink. Moink. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did. And as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should because a family farm does it better. The Moink difference is a difference that you can taste. And I've been ordering my Moink boxes. I pay for them also myself, by the way. So I'm not just saying that. They did send me one free box, but then I've been buying them on my own after that. And it really is excellent meat, excellent high quality. And what I really like about it is I feel good knowing that I'm helping out actual family farms rather than these big industries, these big the big commercial farms that are owned by foreign countries. I like knowing that I'm supporting family farms and trying to help keep them in business. Farmers are at risk of going away completely. We really should do everything that we can to keep them in business. And Moink is one way to help do that because you're paying directly from them. You're not going through some middleman. And you're going to choose the meat that's delivered in every box. So you could decide if there's certain meats you don't like to eat. You can exclude those. You can add other meats. But for me, I get ribeyes, chicken breasts, pork chops, salmon fillets. There's a lot more that you can get. Plus, you can cancel anytime. But keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/Kim. And if you do this, listeners of this show are going to get free ground beef for a year. So they'll throw a ground beef package in each of your boxes for a year. And it is excellent ground beef. It is the best ground beef you'll ever taste. It's for a limited time. So go to Moink, that's MOINK box.com/Kim. The link is down below. That is moinkbox.com/Kim, and get your 1 year of free beef in your boxes, your Moink boxes. Try it out. You'll like it. Okay. Still with Israel, we can't get off of this topic, unfortunately, but Netanyahu is calling for war. This is maybe another reason to suspect that the Israelis were behind the hospital bombing in Gaza. Here's Netanyahu saying that he is finding the axis of evil and that the world needs to gather around Israel because Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran are the new Nazis. Watch this.
Hamas are the new Nazis. Hamas is ISIS, in some instances worse than ISIS. And just as the world united to defeat the Nazis, just as the world united to defeat ISIS, the world has to stand united behind Israel to defeat Hamas. This is part of an axis of evil of Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas. Their goal, open goal, is to eradicate the state of Israel. The open goal of Hamas is to kill as many Jews as they could, and the only difference is they would have killed every last one of us, murdered every last one of us, if they could. They just don't have the capacity, but they murdered an extraordinary 1,300 civilians, which in American terms is like many, many, many 9/11s. So obviously we must take action to defeat Hamas and to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But this is not only our battle, it is our common battle, the battle of civilization against barbarism. And if it's not stopped here, this savagery will reach you very soon and reach the entire world.
So this was a meeting with the Germans. The chancellor, I believe, visited Israel. Let me just double check on that one. But he certainly had the German flags behind him. So yes, the Chancellor Scholz was there meeting with Netanyahu, and this is when Netanyahu was saying that the new Nazis are Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, and that the world needs to get together and back Israel in their battle on this. So it looks like this is increasing into a wider war. There's been attempts by Antony Blinken, who went around to all the Arab nations and also met with Netanyahu. There have been attempts to try to limit this, to keep this into just a battle between the Israelis and the Palestinians and not have this seep out into a wider war. But it looks like the rhetoric coming from Netanyahu is that this is going to turn into a wider war. The other countries are realizing this, and they're probably gearing up. That's why we're seeing a cancellation of meetings with Joe Biden, with the Arab nations. The Arab nations are increasingly getting tense. This is going to be a very difficult situation for Joe Biden to try to handle when he goes over to the Middle East. He's on his way now. And it's going to be a very difficult, tenuous situation for him to try to manage. You've got Netanyahu very clearly war rhetoric saying we are facing the axis of evil. If you remember, that was when George Bush was the one to call. He said it was Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, I believe, were the axis of evil. And he said this just after the 9/11 attacks. So this is when America was ready to go to war, hyped up to go to war, very much wanting to defend our country after the 9/11 attacks. And Netanyahu's using that same phrasing and the same emotions in order to pull everyone into the war to support Israel. So this is going to be a real tenuous situation for Joe Biden. Is he going to be able to calm tensions down and prevent a wider war from breaking out in the Middle East? Interestingly, also, I just want to bring up that Zelensky requested to meet with Israel, to fly to Israel and to meet with Netanyahu at the same time as Joe Biden and Antony Blinken. And the Israelis denied that request. They were like, no, now is not the time. So it's kind of interesting. What was Zelensky going to do in Israel? Was he going to go there and say, yes, your war is important, but so is ours. Don't forget about us. Hey, we're over here. Give us money. We still need money. We're still fighting a war. I think Zelensky is certainly worried because the U.S.'s backing of Israel is much stronger than it ever has been of Ukraine. Ukraine is definitely something that in recent years, many of the U.S. establishment elite have been very much focused on, but Israel has been the tried and true so-called, quote unquote, ally of the United States. I say it like that, quote unquote, or so-called ally, because I'm not sure exactly how this alliance works. They're not in NATO, for one, so they're not actually in an alliance, in a defense pact with the United States. They do not have to commit any soldiers to the United States if we were to be attacked. There's this kind of lip service that's given saying, yeah, we will defend you and you will defend us. But Israel has never put any boots on the ground for any of the wars or combat situations that the United States has been in, Afghanistan, Iraq, any of the wars in Vietnam, South Korea. Israel has not provided any troops whatsoever for those battles. So I'm not 100% certain what the alliance is, what the agreement is with the alliance, other than what I do know, which is that the U.S. pledges undying, unwavering support to Israel, and that an attack, according to Nikki Haley, on Israel is an attack on the United States, which is not true. We don't have a defense pact with Israel. That is actually stated in NATO Article 5, that an attack on one is an attack on the others. We don't have any arrangement like that with Israel. We don't have anything like that. So I'm a little confused on what the alliance is and how we are these, the strongest allies ever. And that's kind of the rhetoric we hear out of the politicians in Washington. I would just like them to produce evidence and a document of this. But the axis of evil, so it looks like we may be going into a wider war in the Middle East. This is very concerning. We do have some aircraft carriers that have been deployed to the Middle East. We do have 2,000 troops that are being deployed to the Middle East. And if Israel does get itself into an engagement, the big question is going to be all of these politicians, all of the people running for president, from RFK Jr. to Donald Trump to Nikki Haley. We already know what Nikki Haley would do. We already know what Ron DeSantis would do. They've already said war, war, war. We will back Israel. It's unclear if Donald Trump, if he were elected president, or if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was elected president. It's a little unclear. They both are definitely staunch supporters of Israel and have said, yes, Israel and the military might, but it's unclear if they would actually commit ground troops to Israel or continued, maybe naval support or air support. It's unclear what they would commit. And that is a big question that many of us have. And it's a good question that we should be asking. Certainly, though, American politicians seem to be all in for Israel. So it's a good question for somebody like Jim Jordan, who is attempting to gain the speakership gavel. Jim Jordan has been staunchly against giving money and continued aid to Ukraine and committing any sort of ground troops to that offensive, or defensive and offensive in Ukraine, both of them. No ground troops whatsoever coming from the United States. So what would he do when it comes to Israel? That is a big question many of us have, because we've seen the staunch support that our politicians have for Israel. How staunch is that support? Will we go to war for Israel? That is a big, big question. I don't think Americans would commit or be okay with going to war for Taiwan, for example. There's a lot of rhetoric around that. You've got Lindsey Graham constantly, flapping around about, we want to pick on China and go to war over Taiwan, and we must do this. And we see a lot of the rhetoric coming from politicians about Taiwan, but I'm not so certain they would ever really truly commit any ground troops. I think it'd be very similar to Ukraine, because ultimately the American people don't have an appetite for it. The American people are not going to go and fight on the ground against Russia on behalf of Ukraine. And I don't think the American people are going to commit to sending off their young men and women to Taiwan to battle China. I don't think that's in the American appetite. Israel is a question. It's a question mark. Is there an appetite there? I have to be honest with you guys. I think there is. I think there's a lot of Americans who would say yes to this. And I think that if Israel goes to war, I think we're going to see American boots on the ground. I think enough people feel like we have to protect the Jews. After World War II, this is going to be another protection very similar to that. And that was the last time the United States fought, I think, a valiant war and won. I don't think we've had very many valiant wars since then. And so that would be kind of a return to the good old days to really, truly help a group of oppressed people. That would be the thinking. And I think there would be a big appetite for it. I'm not going to lie. So it's a bit scary. And now you've got Netanyahu calling for this wider war, saying that it's an axis of evil and that these are Nazis and that we all need to band together in order to support it. So things are getting tense. Things are getting very, very tense. And I don't think that a Republican president suddenly going into the Oval Office is going to change this that much. I don't think Joe Biden being there, or if it's a different Republic, maybe Donald Trump, because he seems to be less interested in war than all the others. And so perhaps he would be the one that says, yeah, we'll help you in some ways, but we're not going to commit any ground troops. I don't know. I would love to hear from you, though, on what you think of this. And you could email me, kim@KimIverson.com. I would absolutely love to hear from you on, if you think the U.S. would commit ground troops, whether or not you think Donald Trump would commit ground troops, or Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or whoever, take your pick of president. I would love to hear from you, kim@KimIverson.com. All right, guys, Field of Greens. You guys know I love this stuff. This is a fine powder made from dehydrated whole fruits and vegetables that are carefully selected to give you the most nutrients in your diet possible. You just take a scoop of this powder, you mix it into your ice water, and it actually does really taste good. It's not one of those gross green drinks you have to choke down. It actually is really good. I like the lemon lime flavor. I think it tastes like iced green tea with lemon, which I really like. I order that sometimes when I'm out at a coffee shop. So I don't have to. Instead, I just mix this up, and it's better than an iced green tea with lemon that I could get anywhere else, because it actually has all the nutrients you need. So if you're not getting all your fruits and vegetables into your diet, which you need to in order to have a healthy life, this is a great way to do it. So head to fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code Kim, and you will get 15% off of your first order. That is fieldofgreens.com. 15% off your first order using the promo code Kim. Try it out. You'll like it. Okay. Now, we're waiting on the speakership stuff with Jim Jordan, right? He failed the first vote, could not get all the votes that he needed round one in order to get that speaker gavel. But here is something really kind of interesting. Some Democrats, you think Democrats were supposed to be the party anti-war. They definitely were supposed to be. But, lately we've seen that they're very much for war. They're for the war in Ukraine. They're very much for defending Israel. And now a House Democratic lawmaker actually floated, as we're hearing these various names, Jim Jordan's not going to get it. And you got some Republicans saying, why not Donald Trump? Maybe he could be Speaker of the House. Well, this Democrat actually floats George W. Bush for Speaker of the House. And you won't believe what he says. It's because we need a sensible Republican. A sensible Republican. George W. Bush, the war criminal. They want him back in the speakership, saying, well, this is the type of Republican we want back in office. I mean, this is just disgusting. Forbes newsroom, California Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman was the idiot who floated the idea. I'm sorry, I don't mean to call names and stuff, but come on. I mean, this is really beyond. I mean, George W. Bush, honestly. So he floated the idea of former President George W. Bush becoming the next Speaker of the House. He said he could come back. Obviously, I'm not a real fan of how the Iraq War went, but I would think that any reasonable Republican would be somebody that Democrats could work with if it was part of a system where you didn't have 5 of the most extreme Republicans blocking important legislation and saying, if you bring that to a floor vote, we'll knock you out of your speakership. So what he's saying is that they want a reasonable Republican that Democrats say they can work with. I mean, what bizarro land are we living in that Democrats think the reasonable Republican they could work with is George W. Bush? But the reason why is because war. Democrats want war. What they're mad about is that you're going to get somebody like Jim Jordan potentially holding that gavel, and he's not going to want to give extra funding to Ukraine, endless funding to Ukraine. That is what they're pissed off about. And they want a reasonable Republican. What they really mean is a warmonger Republican who's going to bring us back to the good old days of endless war anywhere we want, funding wars all over the place. So they're saying that there's these extreme Republicans that they can't back, and that would be the Jim Jordan of the bunch. And these extreme Republicans won't vote for Ukraine funding, and so they want good old warmonger George W. Bush. You can't make this stuff up. Are we living in real life? I mean, is this real? The Democrats, I mean, I understand Liz Cheney's of the world saying, we want George Bush back, and we love George Bush, or even the Meghan McCain's of the world. We want George Bush, good old warmonger. These are Republicans who want the good old warmongers back. But for Democrats, I mean, this is just really showcasing a whole new level of thinking. I thought it was bad with Democrats. I thought they had really turned a warmongery corner, but this just really, ices that cake, doesn't it? It's beyond icing. This just puts the candle right in the center of it. Unbelievable. I don't think it's going to happen. The good news is I don't think that they're going to end up with Jordan. I mean, who knows, though? Anything could happen. If they end up with 10 times over a Jim Jordan vote and he still can't get the speakership, who knows who they're going to be proposing to put in there that Democrats will say, well, we'll vote for this one. We'll vote for one of these old-timey warmonger Republicans because we want you populist anti-war Republicans gone because you people are fascists. You people are dangerous. You anti-war Republicans are so dangerous, even though Jim Jordan is not anti-war when it comes to Israel, but he is when it comes to Ukraine, much more measured about a lot of things. Obviously, he's been going after Anthony Fauci. He's been going after social media censorship. Democrats can't stand it. They want a good old authoritarian warmonger in the speakership, and they will vote for him, apparently, if push comes to shove. Well, the fact is, guys, because we are living in such uncertain times, we don't know what's going to happen with our economy. We don't know what's going to happen with the dollar. We don't know what's going to happen with any of this stuff because things are wild. Things seem to only be getting wilder. So maybe you want to diversify your assets and you're thinking, I want to get into some gold because I'm not so sure about the dollar. Gold is accepted everywhere. It's understood everywhere. It is a currency that everybody understands all around the world. And that is why it is the one asset that has been able to withstand economic upheaval, and it has a history of being incredibly stable. So visit birchgold.com/Kim to get your free info kit on how you could get yourself started in investing into gold. So maybe you're going to want to do an IRA in precious metals. You can convert your existing 401k or existing IRA into an IRA in precious metals. Maybe you want to go that route. I personally like physical gold. Maybe you want to get yourself some physical gold that you keep in a home safe or that you keep in a safety deposit box, however you want to do it. But the people at Birch Gold, the experts there, they're going to hold your hand through the whole process and figure out what's best for you. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers. So visit birchgold.com/Kim for your free info kit on gold. Again, that is birchgold.com/Kim. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. I am hoping that at some point the conversation won't be Israel, Israel, Israel all the time. I'm personally fed up with it, but at the same time, that is what's in the news. That is what's going on, and it keeps escalating, and we're potentially being dragged into another conflict. Certainly we are. We've got aircraft carriers in the Middle East. We've got presidents flying out there, Secretary of State going out there twice, Netanyahu calling the axis of evil and saying that everyone needs to rise up against the Nazis. This is getting really serious. So we have to talk about it. We have to continue covering it. But there is a lot of other stuff going on, and we definitely don't want to neglect that. We're going to try to get to more stories this week. We're just going to hope that things calm down and that there is a ceasefire in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that we can work out an actual political solution for the Palestinians so that they do not continue on this path and that the cycle of violence ends in Israel. That's what we would really like to see for all people in the region. But we will be back again for another great show tomorrow night, and we'll see what tomorrow brings, won't we? But be sure to join us tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Until then, guys, have a great one. Good night.